The smell of sizzling bacon and freshly brewed coffee drifted through the small-town diner as Eli Walker flipped pancakes with the kind of ease that only came from years behind a hot griddle. The morning sun spilled through the windows, casting a golden glow across the worn linoleum floors and faded booth cushions. It was just another Wednesday in the sleepy town of Maple Ridge, quiet, predictable, and comforting in its own way. Eli glanced toward the corner booth where his 8-year-old daughter, Ruby, sat cross-legged, a crayon in one hand and a half-finished drawing in the other. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she filled in the sky with streaks of orange and pink. To Eli, she was the heart of this place, and the reason he kept going even when the days felt heavier than the plates he served. The diner itself wasn't much, just 6 booths, a counter with mismatched stools, and a chalkboard menu that hadn't been updated in months. But to Eli, it was more than a business. After losing his wife 3 years ago, this small roadside eatery had become his lifeline, his way of holding things together for Ruby, even when the cracks threatened to show. Locals filtered in with sleepy smiles and murmured greetings, sliding into their usual spots. A pair of truckers nursed mugs of coffee while discussing engine trouble. An elderly couple split a plate of eggs, their hands brushing now and then with quiet affection. The rhythm of the morning unfolded like it always did, unrushed, familiar. Eli wiped his hands on a towel, eyes sweeping the room. He had come to appreciate the stillness of mornings like this, the comfort of routine. It didn't bring in much money, but it brought something else. Peace. And then the bell above the diner door jingled. Eli looked up automatically, expecting another regular. But the woman who stepped inside didn't look like she belonged in Maple Ridge. Not even close. Tall, poised, wrapped in a coat that probably cost more than Eli made in a week. She didn't just walk in. She disrupted the entire room without saying a word. And in that moment, Eli Walker had no idea his world was about to change. The woman stood just inside the doorway, her eyes scanning the room like she wasn't sure if she had stepped into the right place or the right world. Her chestnut hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, slightly tousled from the wind, and her black wool coat was tailored to perfection. The heels on her boots clicked softly against the linoleum as she moved toward a booth by the window. Every movement calculated, yet cautious. Eli tossed his towel over his shoulder and approached her with the easy calm of someone used to welcoming strangers. "Morning," he said, offering a small smile. "You can sit wherever you like. Window seat's a good choice." She gave a polite nod, her lips curving faintly. "Thanks." He placed a menu in front of her. "Coffee?" "Yes, please," she replied, her voice smooth but tight, controlled, like someone used to being in charge but currently holding herself together by a thread. Eli poured her a steaming cup and slid it across the table. She wrapped her fingers around the mug like she needed the warmth more than the caffeine. Her eyes wandered to the window, but her mind was clearly somewhere else, far away. "Take your time with the menu," Eli said gently. She didn't answer right away, just nodded absently. Back behind the counter, Eli glanced over at Ruby, who had now moved on to coloring a tree with bright blue leaves. She looked up and gave him a grin. Eli returned it, though his thoughts drifted back to the woman in the booth. She was out of place, not just because of her clothes or the way she carried herself, but because of the look in her eyes, not lost like someone who'd taken a wrong turn on the highway, lost like someone who had no idea where they were supposed to be anymore. A few minutes passed before he returned with his notepad. "Ready to order?" She blinked like she'd just been pulled out of a dream. She glanced at the menu for the first time. "Just some scrambled eggs and toast, please." "You got it," he said, scribbling it down. As he turned to walk away, he hesitated. Her hands were still wrapped around the coffee mug, her knuckles slightly white. "You okay, ma'am?" She looked up, clearly caught off guard. Then she forced a tight smile. "Just a long morning." Eli nodded. He knew that look, had worn it himself more times than he cared to admit. "Well," he said softly, "a hot breakfast never hurts." She gave a small nod and looked back out the window. When he brought the food to her table, she reached into her coat pocket, likely to grab a wallet, but then she froze. Her brow furrowed. Her hand moved to the other pocket, then back again. Something changed in her face, anxiety flooding in like a storm. Her breathing quickened. I, her voice was barely a whisper. I think I lost my wallet. The words were filled with shame and disbelief, like she couldn't quite accept it herself. Eli didn't even blink. Don't worry about it, he said, setting the plate down with a soft smile. Breakfast is on me. No, I can call someone. I can pay you back, she stammered. It's just breakfast, he said again, reassuring. Not a big deal. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a second something shifted behind her eyes. Confusion, gratitude, maybe even relief. She ate in silence, slowly, like her mind was still racing while her body moved on autopilot. Eli returned to the counter, taking other orders, refilling mugs, but he kept glancing her way. When she was done, she lingered, then stood and moved toward the register. Thank you, she said quietly. Anytime, Eli replied. She pulled out her phone only to realize the screen was black. Dead. Of course, she muttered under her breath, more to herself than anyone else. Eli caught the frustration in her posture, the kind that doesn't come from one bad day, but from the kind of unraveling that happens when everything you've built starts to slip through your fingers. Need a place to charge that? He asked. She hesitated, her pride clearly wrestling with her circumstance. Then her eyes drifted to Ruby, who was now humming a tune and happily coloring in the background. I don't want to impose, she said quietly, but I might need a little help figuring out what to do next. Eli studied her for a moment. He didn't know her story, where she came from, what she was running from, but he knew what it looked like when someone was barely holding it together. He nodded toward the door. Come on, let's figure it out. And just like that, the trajectory of their lives began to change. The morning air was brisk as Eli held the door open for Clara. She stepped outside, her eyes adjusting to the soft glow of the small town waking up. The quiet hum of Maple Ridge life surrounded them. The rumble of an old truck starting down the road, the distant bark of a dog, and the faint rustle of leaves caught in the wind. Eli shoved his hands into the pockets of his flannel jacket and glanced at her. So, what's the plan? Clara exhaled, rubbing her temples. Honestly, I don't really have one. Her voice was raw, honest. He raised an eyebrow. Most people would have made up a story by now, some excuse to save face, but not her. I lost my wallet. My phone's dead. I can't call anyone until I get it charged. And I left my rental car back at the highway rest stop. She laughed under her breath, but there was no humor in it. I'm a walking disaster. Eli tilted his head, studying her. Well, the nearest bank's 3 miles out. No car, no phone, not the easiest position to be in. She gave a sheepish nod. Yeah, I know. I get off in a few hours, he said. I can drive you there if you don't mind waiting around. Her brows lifted slightly. You'd really do that? He shrugged. Sure. You've had a rough morning. There was a pause, then Clara smiled. Small, unsure but genuine. Thank you. Come on, Eli said, nodding toward the door. You can sit inside where it's warm. Ruby'll be glad for the company. They stepped back into the diner together. Ruby looked up from her drawing, eyes lighting up when she saw Clara. You're still here, she said brightly. Clara smiled. Looks like it. Ruby slid across the booth to make room. Want to color with me? Clara blinked, clearly caught off guard by the invitation. Sure. She sat down slowly, as if unsure of how to act around a child. But Ruby didn't hesitate. She pushed a handful of crayons toward her and handed her a blank sheet of paper. You can draw anything you want, Ruby said seriously, but I'm drawing a horse. Clara chuckled softly. I haven't drawn anything since, I don't know, middle school. Ruby shrugged. It's easy. Just try. Eli watched from behind the counter, his hands moving automatically through the motions of flipping pancakes and refilling coffee cups. But his eyes kept drifting back to the corner booth. There was something strangely peaceful about the sight of Clara hunched over a piece of paper, tongue slightly poking out as she attempted to draw beside his daughter. Something right. As the hours passed, the breakfast rush faded. Locals left with full stomachs and warm goodbyes. Clara stayed. By the time Eli untied his apron and stretched out the tension in his shoulders, it was nearly noon. "All right," he said, stepping out from behind the counter. "Let's get you to that bank." Clara stood, brushing invisible crumbs off her coat. But before they reached the door, Ruby piped up from her booth. "Are you coming back for dinner?" Clara paused, surprised. She looked at Eli, unsure how to answer. "Ruby," he said gently, "you can't just invite people over like that." Ruby frowned. "Why not?" Clara's lips curled into a reluctant smile. "I might have to take you up on that, kiddo." Eli shook his head, amused. He didn't argue. The drive to the bank was quiet. Clara stared out the window, watching fields and trees blur past, a far cry from the steel and glass skyline she was used to. "So," Eli said, breaking the silence, "where exactly are you from?" She hesitated. "New York." "That explains the boots," he said with a faint grin. She let out a short laugh. "Yeah, doesn't really scream small-town diner, huh?" "Not exactly," he said, smirking. "But you're managing." They arrived at the bank, but when Clara came back out 15 minutes later, her expression said everything. "No luck?" Eli asked. "They won't issue a temporary card until I verify my identity in person at my home branch." She looked defeated. "I need to figure something else out." Eli nodded slowly. "Well, if you don't have anywhere else to go tonight, I've got a guest room." Clara stared at him, blinking. "You don't have to do that." "Yeah," he said, "but maybe I want to." Clara had planned to stay just one night, maybe two at most. But somehow one morning turned into another, and before she knew it, she was waking up in Eli Walker's modest guest room for the third day in a row. Still no wallet, still no phone reception worth trusting, and still not quite ready to go back to the life she had temporarily abandoned. She helped wash the dishes after dinner, folded laundry with Ruby while listening to the little girl chatter about school, and every morning she found herself back in the diner, pouring coffee, delivering plates, and learning which locals liked their eggs over easy and which ones needed extra ketchup on everything. And she was happy, tired but happy. Clara Bennett, CEO of Bennett Dining Group, owner of more than 50 high-end restaurants nationwide, was wiping down tables and refilling sugar jars in a roadside diner in a town no one had heard of. And somehow this life felt more real than the empire she had built with spreadsheets and sleepless nights. At first, she kept her head down. She didn't want to answer questions, didn't want to explain who she was or what she was doing here. She didn't lie exactly, but she didn't volunteer the truth either. It felt good to just be Clara, not Ms. Bennett, not the woman on the cover of business magazines, just a tired woman who'd lost her wallet and maybe, somewhere along the way, a piece of herself. Still, Eli had his suspicions. One afternoon after the lunch rush had died down and Ruby had gone to a play date, Clara leaned against the counter, sipping lemonade and watching Eli as he scraped the grill clean. "You're getting the hang of it," he said without looking up. "Only spilled coffee twice today." She laughed. "I think that's a personal record." "You ever work in food service before?" Clara hesitated. "Sort of." "Sort of?" "I've spent a lot of time around restaurants." Eli gave her a look. "You say that like you're not telling me something." Clara took a breath, then met his gaze. "I own restaurants." He blinked. "You own restaurants?" She nodded slowly. "A lot of them, actually. High-end places in New York, LA, Chicago." Eli leaned back, arms folded. "Well, that explains the coat." Clara gave a sheepish smile. "Yeah, sorry I didn't say anything. I just, Didn't want to be that person here. Not right away. Eli was quiet for a moment, then shrugged. Doesn't change much. You're still the woman who dropped a tray of scrambled eggs on Earl Jenkins. She laughed, relieved by his reaction. True. He turned back to the grill, flipping a few strips of bacon. So why'd you really come here, Clara? She didn't answer right away. She stared at the glass of lemonade in her hands. Because I forgot what it feels like to breathe, she said softly. Because I spent years building something that doesn't love me back. And because I didn't know where else to go. Eli didn't press her. He just nodded as if he understood better than he let on. Later that evening, Clara sat on the front porch with Ruby, watching the stars poke through the fading blue sky. Do you like it here? Ruby asked, her voice small. Clara looked around, the creaking porch swing, the scent of grass and pine, the soft hum of crickets. I think I do, she said. Ruby smiled. Good. I like when you're here. Clara felt something warm bloom in her chest. Unexpected, but welcome. Maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The days in Maple Ridge began to fall into a quiet rhythm. Morning started early, Eli in the kitchen, Ruby dragging her backpack into the booth by the window, and Clara tying on an apron with a resigned grin, ready to tackle another breakfast shift. She was getting better at balancing plates, less likely to spill syrup, and, perhaps most surprisingly, she had started to remember the locals' names. There was something comforting about the simplicity of it all. In her old life, every minute had been scheduled, every conversation calculated. Here, people said what they meant. They didn't care about her net worth, her resume, or her last press release. They just cared if she remembered how they liked their toast. And Eli, he was nothing like the men Clara had known in her corporate world. He didn't talk to impress. He listened. He didn't posture. He worked with his hands, with his heart, and with a quiet strength that made her feel more grounded than she had in years. They shared more now. Small things at first, favorite foods, childhood stories, music they liked. But it grew. One night after Ruby had gone to bed, they sat on the porch with mugs of tea in hand, watching the wind rustle through the trees. My wife's name was Emily, Eli said, his voice soft. She passed 3 years ago. Cancer. It happened fast. Clara looked at him, her chest tightening. I'm sorry. He nodded. Me too. She must have been incredible. She was, he said, his smile faint but real. She gave me Ruby. That's more than enough. They sat in silence for a moment. Clara didn't talk about her past relationships. There wasn't much to say. Everything had always come second to the business. There had been no room for anything, or anyone else. But now there was space. Space to feel, to wonder, to want something different. The next day, Ruby came home from school holding a wrinkled permission slip and a huge grin. Daddy, Clara, there's a fall festival this weekend. Can we go? Please? Clara glanced at Eli. He smiled. Sure, kiddo. Ruby squealed and spun in a circle. Clara, you have to come too. Clara laughed. I wouldn't miss it. The day of the festival arrived with crisp air and golden leaves. Clara had borrowed a pair of jeans and a flannel shirt from a box of Emily's old clothes. Eli hadn't said much when he handed them over, but there had been something tender in the gesture. The three of them wandered the festival grounds, eating kettle corn, watching a pie-eating contest, and even attempting the hay maze. Ruby held both of their hands the entire time, swinging between them like a human pendulum. At one point, Clara caught Eli watching her. Not just a glance, a real look. What? She asked, brushing hair from her face. He shook his head slightly. You look happy. She blinked. I am. And she meant it. Later that night, after Ruby had fallen asleep on the couch, Eli walked Clara to the porch. The porch light glowed softly between them. You're good with her, Eli said. She makes it easy, Clara replied. He hesitated. You've become Important to her, Clara swallowed. She's become important to me, too. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Vulnerable, honest, real. Clara looked away first, her heart pounding in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. And in the quiet, she wondered just how far she'd already fallen. The festival lingered in the town's memory, like the scent of caramel apples and bonfire smoke. For Clara, it had been perfect, almost too perfect. A small-town dream she never knew she wanted, now becoming something she didn't want to let go. But Maple Ridge wasn't a place built for secrets. And Clara Bennett had a big one. It was a Tuesday afternoon, quiet and slow, with just a few customers at the diner. Ruby was at school. Clara was wiping down tables, humming softly to herself, when the bell above the door chimed. She didn't look up, just called out with a practiced smile, "Welcome in. Sit anywhere you'd like." But the voice that answered made her freeze. "Well, this is unexpected." Clara turned slowly. Standing in the doorway was David Langford, her CFO, dressed in a designer suit that looked out of place among the faded booths and laminated menus. "David," she said, stunned, "what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same," he replied, glancing around the diner with a faint look of disgust. "We've been trying to reach you for days. Your assistant was about to file a missing person report." Clara's throat tightened. "I needed time." "Time?" David raised an eyebrow. "You're the CEO of a national brand, Clara. You don't just disappear. The board is panicking. Investors are circling like vultures." "I said I'd handle it," she said quietly, aware of Eli now standing behind the counter watching. "Handle it?" David scoffed. "You're playing waitress in some backwoods town." Eli stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Excuse me, is there a problem here?" David gave him a once-over, taking in the rolled-up sleeves, the worn jeans, the tired eyes. He smirked. "And you are?" "Eli Walker," Eli replied evenly. "I own this place." "Of course you do," David said, his tone thick with condescension. Clara stepped between them. "David, that's enough." David shook his head, laughing bitterly. "So this is where you've been hiding, living out some kind of Hallmark movie fantasy." "I'm not hiding," Clara said, but even she could hear the defensiveness in her voice. David turned to her, voice lowering. "You need to come back, Clara. Now. Before everything you've worked for unravels." Eli's eyes flicked to Clara, confusion written all over his face. "Clara." She looked at him, her stomach sinking. She hadn't told him her last name. Hadn't told him anything, really. "Clara Bennett?" he asked, slowly piecing it together. "As in Bennett Dining Group?" She swallowed. "Yes." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Eli stared at her. "So all this time you've just been, what, playing pretend?" "No," Clara said quickly. "It wasn't like that." David folded his arms. "Sounds like it was exactly like that." "I didn't mean to lie," Clara said, her voice cracking. At first I didn't want anyone to treat me differently. And then, I didn't know how to bring it up." Eli's face was unreadable. "You let me think you were just some lost tourist." "I was lost," she said. "I still am." David stepped forward. "Clara, we need to go. Now." She turned to him, but her eyes drifted back to Eli. And for the first time in a long time, she realized she had a choice. Go back to the life she had built, a life of power, prestige, and pressure, or stay in this quiet, imperfect world where, for the first time, she had felt seen. "I'm not leaving," she said, voice steady. "Not yet." David stared at her, stunned. "Clara, don't be ridiculous." "I'll call you later," she said, her tone final. He opened his mouth to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. With a sharp exhale, he turned and walked out, the doorbell jingling behind him. The diner was silent for a long moment. Eli didn't say anything. He just looked at her, then turned and walked back into the kitchen. Clara stood frozen, heart pounding, watching him disappear behind the swinging doors. When she finally pushed them open, she found him wiping down the counter with unnecessary force. "I was going to tell you," she said softly. He didn't look up. "Were you?" "I didn't know how." "You didn't trust me." "I didn't trust myself," she admitted. "I was afraid that if I told you, this whole thing would end." Eli stopped, leaning both hands on the counter. "Clara, I don't care that you're rich. I don't care about the company, but I do care that you didn't think I could handle the truth." She stepped closer. "I never meant to hurt you." He sighed, finally meeting her gaze. "I just need to know, what do you want, Clara? Really?" She swallowed, suddenly unsure. "I don't know," she whispered. "Then figure it out," he said quietly. "But I can't be a placeholder while you decide." And with that, he turned away, leaving Clara alone in the middle of the diner she had come to love, now feeling more like a stranger than ever. The next morning, Clara sat at the edge of the guest bed, staring at her phone like it might bite. It had been charging all night. And now that it was finally full of life again, so was her inbox. Missed calls from her assistant, her board, her father. Dozens of messages, each more urgent than the last. She didn't open a single one. Instead, she walked to the window, pushed the curtain aside, and stared out at the quiet backyard. The early light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the grass. It was peaceful, too peaceful for the storm brewing inside her. Downstairs, she could hear Ruby's laughter echoing from the kitchen. Eli was probably flipping pancakes, pretending everything was fine, pretending he hadn't been blindsided by the truth. Clara knew she couldn't stay hidden in that room forever, so she did what she'd been putting off. She booked a flight. She didn't tell Eli. She barely told herself. But the confirmation email pinged in her inbox like a final nail in the coffin. Later that morning, Ruby found her sitting on the porch steps, suitcase already by the door. "You're leaving," the little girl said simply. Clara froze. "Ruby." "I saw the suitcase," she said, her voice quiet. "And Daddy said sometimes people leave even when they don't want to." Clara felt her heart twist. "I don't want to leave," she admitted. "Then don't," Ruby said like it was that easy. "You make the best pancakes, after Daddy." Clara laughed softly, blinking back sudden tears. "That's a pretty big compliment." Ruby nodded solemnly. "You could stay." Clara couldn't find words, so she pulled Ruby into a hug instead. She left just after lunch, slipping away before she lost her nerve. Eli didn't try to stop her, didn't ask where she was going. He simply gave her a quiet nod when she said goodbye. It hurt more than she expected. The airport was a blur of noise and movement. Clara moved through it like a ghost, barely registering the crowds, the announcements, the scent of overpriced coffee. Her gate was already boarding. She stood there, ticket in hand, heart pounding. This was the life she'd built. The job, the power, the safety net. But then she thought about Ruby's laughter, Eli's silence, the way the diner smelled like cinnamon and bacon on chilly mornings. And suddenly the idea of going back to who she used to be felt suffocating. Her phone buzzed again. Her father. Clara stared at the screen. Then slowly she pressed the red button and ended the call. She turned, walked away from the gate, and didn't stop walking until she was outside, breath clouding in the cool air, her heart racing with something that felt suspiciously like hope. She called a cab, paid a ridiculous fare to get back to Maple Ridge, and spent the ride staring out the window, rehearsing what she would say. But when she got back to Eli's house, the porch light was off. She knocked once, then again. No answer. Panic flickered in her chest. Was he gone? Was it too late? She turned and ran, straight to the diner. The moment she stepped inside, the bell jingled, and there he was, behind the counter, exactly where he always was. Eli looked up. His eyes met hers. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. Not right away. "I couldn't do it," Clara said finally, her voice low. I couldn't get on that plane. Eli stared at her. Why? She took a shaky breath. Because none of that meant anything without you, without Ruby, without this. He didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. I'm not saying I have all the answers, she continued, but I know what I want now. I want to stay. I want to figure it out, with you, if you'll let me. Eli's jaw tightened. You left. I know. You packed a bag, bought a ticket, and left. I know, she repeated, softer this time. And I'm sorry. He ran a hand through his hair. Clara, I've got Ruby to think about. I can't let someone in who's going to walk away when things get hard. She nodded. I understand. I needed to tell you that I'm here, that I'm not running anymore. They stood in silence, then, finally, Eli exhaled. All right, he said. One word. Not forgiveness, not a promise, but hope. And for now, that was enough. The next morning, Clara woke up early. Not in a rush, not because of a meeting, not from stress, but with intention. Her feet hit the floor with purpose, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. She had told Eli she was staying. Now it was time to show him. After a quick cup of coffee, she drove into the heart of Maple Ridge. The real estate office sat quietly on Main Street, tucked between the flower shop and a hardware store that smelled like cedar and motor oil. By noon, she walked out holding a set of keys. Her hand trembled slightly as she stared at them. This wasn't a hotel. It wasn't a penthouse or a corporate lease. It was hers, a space to build something real. The storefront was small but full of charm, brick exterior, wide windows, and a slightly crooked "For Lease" sign that she gently took down and replaced with one that read, Coming Soon. Eli and Ruby found her there an hour later. Ruby gasped when she saw the sign. Is this yours? Clara grinned. It will be. Eli looked around, brows raised. You're opening a business? She nodded. A cafe. Something warm. Local. I've wanted to do it for a long time, but never had the courage. She paused, then added, Until now. Eli stepped closer, his voice quiet. Why here? Clara looked at him, no hesitation in her voice. Because this is where I want to be. Ruby's eyes sparkled. Can I help? Can I be your taste tester? Clara laughed, kneeling beside her. Of course, but only if you promise to be brutally honest. Ruby nodded seriously. I'm very professional. Eli stood still, arms crossed, watching Clara like he was seeing her for the first time. You really mean it, he said. I do. She turned toward the storefront, imagining what it would look like filled with light. The smell of cinnamon and espresso in the air, people from town gathered at small tables. No rush, just life happening. Not the empire she had once ruled over, but something better, something she could love. Eli let out a slow breath, then smiled. Well, you're going to need a name. I already have one, Clara replied. She looked up at the wooden awning and whispered, like a promise, Root and Rise. The scent of fresh baked bread and warm cinnamon filled the air as Clara carefully arranged a tray of pastries in the glass display case. Root and Rise had only been open for a few weeks, but already it felt like it had always been there, like the town had been waiting for it without knowing. Locals came in with familiar smiles, sharing stories over steaming mugs of coffee. Children pressed sticky fingers against the glass to choose cookies, and neighbors lingered longer than necessary just to talk. Clara welcomed every single one like family. She had traded boardrooms for baking sheets, quarterly reports for handwritten menus, and strangely, it suited her. Across the cafe, Eli leaned against the counter with a crooked smile. Didn't peg you for the small business type, he teased. Clara smirked as she wiped her hands on her apron. Didn't peg you for a softie, and yet here we are. He chuckled, and the easy warmth between them wrapped around her like a favorite sweater. They weren't perfect, but they were honest, and they were trying. That was more than enough. The door burst open and Ruby came running in, her backpack bouncing, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Guess what?" she beamed, waving a piece of paper in the air. Clara crouched down. "What's going on, superstar?" "I won the art contest at school. My painting's going to be in the town fair next weekend." Clara gasped. "Ruby, that's amazing." Eli ruffled her hair. "Told you your clouds look like magic." Ruby grinned and turned serious. "You have to come see it, Clara." "Promise?" Clara looked her in the eyes and said without hesitation, "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Ruby threw her arms around Clara's waist, hugging her tight. Clara held her close, breathing in the moment like it was something she could bottle up and keep forever. When Ruby ran off to hang her paper on the bulletin board, Eli stepped forward, pulling something from his pocket. A key. Clara's eyes widened as he held it out to her. "What's this?" she asked, heart skipping. Eli rubbed the back of his neck. It's a key to the house, if you want it." She blinked, stunned. "Are you sure?" "I'm not asking for a promise," he said softly. "Just, if you're really staying, you shouldn't have to keep renting that little place across town. You're already part of this family." Clara's throat tightened. She took the key, curling her fingers around it like an anchor. "It's not an engagement ring," Eli added quickly. "I know," she whispered, smiling through her tears. "It's better." They stood there a moment longer, silent but full of understanding. A week later, the town fair buzzed with music and laughter. Children raced between booths. The air was filled with the smell of kettle corn and barbecue, and the autumn sky glowed gold above it all. Clara stood with Eli and Ruby in front of the art display, staring at a colorful painting of a house and a little cafe next door. At the bottom in shaky, uneven handwriting were the words, "Our home." Her eyes burned. Eli reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She looked at him, at Ruby dancing nearby, at the people who had become her neighbors, her community, her family. "I'm home," Clara said softly. Eli squeezed her hand. "Yeah," he murmured. "You are." It had been exactly 1 year since Clara walked back into the diner and told Eli Walker she wasn't running anymore. 1 year since she chose this life, a small town, a struggling diner, a little girl with a sharp wit and a big heart, and a man who never promised her the world, but offered her something far more real: stability, kindness, home. The Root and Rise Cafe was now a beloved staple in Maple Ridge. Clara had poured her soul into it, not to prove anything to the world, but to remind herself she could build something slow, steady, and lasting. And every morning she still woke up next to Eli Walker, grateful. He still cooked breakfast like a pro. Ruby, now 10, still sat in her favorite booth after school doing homework and drawing dream homes. And Clara, for the first time in her life, had stopped counting milestones and started counting memories. But today she was planning one more. She had the ring. It wasn't flashy, just a thin, elegant gold band, simple and warm, just like the man she was about to offer it to. Inside, she had it engraved with the words, "Our beginning." She'd never imagined herself being the one to propose, but that was before Eli, before Maple Ridge, before she realized that love wasn't about traditions, it was about timing, truth, and choosing someone over and over again, even when life got messy. And it had been messy. There had been arguments about business hours, parenting styles, and who left the laundry in the washer. There were mornings she missed her old apartment and nights when Eli's silence made her second-guess everything. But through it all, she never stopped choosing him, and he never stopped making space for her. Now it was her turn to give something back. Clara waited until Ruby was at a sleepover with friends. The cafe was closed early for the weekend, and the house was unusually quiet. Eli had just finished cleaning up the dinner dishes when she called out from the living room. "Hey, got a sec?" He looked up, smiling at her from across the room. "What's up?" She was nervous. Not because she was unsure, but because she'd never wanted anything so badly to go right. Clara stood in the center of the room, lit softly by the glow of the fireplace. Her hands were behind her back. She took a slow breath. "Eli Walker," she began, "you once told me you didn't need promises, just honesty. And I love that, because you've never asked me to be anything but real." Kiara, he looked at her with curiosity, brow lifting. "Well," she continued, "I want to make a promise anyway." She brought her hands forward and opened the small velvet box. Eli froze. "I want to promise you that this life we've started, this little, ordinary, beautiful thing we built, is the only place I ever want to be. I want the mornings with burnt toast and Ruby's crayons everywhere. I want the quiet porch talks and coffee that tastes slightly too strong. I want you and everything that comes with you." His mouth parted slightly, eyes locked on hers. "So," she said, breath catching, "will you marry me?" There was a long pause. Not hesitation, just quiet emotion washing over him. Eli took the box, looked at the ring, then looked at her. "You sure you want to marry a guy with dishpan hands and an obsession with pancakes?" Clara laughed, tears welling. "I've never been more sure of anything." He stepped forward, pulled her into his arms and whispered, "Then yes, absolutely yes." They got married in early spring. Under the cherry tree in their backyard, Clara in a simple ivory dress, Eli in a gray vest and suspenders that Ruby insisted made him look extra husbandy. The ceremony was intimate, just close friends, a few neighbors, and of course, Ruby, who gave a speech that made everyone laugh and cry in the same breath. Clara officially became Clara Walker, but more importantly, she became a wife, a stepmom, and soon a mother again. It wasn't long after the wedding that Clara and Eli found out they were expecting. She hadn't planned for it. In fact, she had always assumed motherhood would begin and end with Ruby. But the moment she saw the test, something shifted deep inside her. Not fear, not worry, just joy. When she told Eli, he just stared at her in stunned silence for 5 full seconds, then smiled wider than she had ever seen. "We're really doing this, huh?" he said. "We really are." Ruby took the news better than either of them expected. She was excited, full of questions, and already brainstorming names. She drew a family portrait with the new baby included, tiny, wrapped in a blanket, with Clara and Eli standing close, arms around each other. "We're complete," she said matter-of-factly. Clara wasn't sure when the tears started, only that she hadn't cried that freely in a long time. 2 years, they welcomed a baby girl into the world. Nora June Walker. She had Eli's calm eyes and Clara's curious stare. Ruby was instantly obsessed, declaring herself part-time sister, part-time security guard, and refused to let anyone else hold the baby for more than 5 minutes. Their house changed again. It was louder, messier, full of diapers, bottles, lullabies, and moments where no one slept. But it was also fuller, deeper, and Clara never felt like she had lost a part of herself, only that she had gained more love, more life, more of everything she never knew she needed. One night, after Nora had finally fallen asleep and Ruby was snoring softly in her room, Clara and Eli stood on the porch in silence, watching the stars blink overhead. "Crazy how much can change in a year," Eli said quietly. Clara nodded. "I used to think change meant losing who you were. And now? Now I think change is how we become who we're meant to be." Eli slipped an arm around her. "You're the bravest person I know, Clara." She leaned into him. "No, I just finally stopped running." They stood there a while longer, the world quiet around them, their home alive behind them. A family not made by chance, but by choice. And nothing had ever felt more right.